Have you ever been lying in bed at 2 in the morning, trying to fall asleep, when suddenly your brain decides to replay a conversation from 4 days ago? Not even an important conversation, just that moment when you said something slightly awkward at the coffee shop, and the barista gave you this look. That look. Oh, Lord, it is good to be here with you. If that scenario made your chest tighten just now, you are not alone. We are about to talk about something that steals hours of your life without permission: social overthinking. And I want to be clear from the start. This is not a pep talk about confidence or some garbage about visualization. This is about understanding why your brain does this to you in the first place, and what you can actually do to make it stop. Let me tell you about the worst conversation I ever had. I was at a friend's party, standing in the kitchen with a warm beer I was not even drinking. This woman I had been wanting to talk to for weeks was finally standing right there, asking me about my job. Simple question, easy answer. But instead of just saying what I do, I panicked and started explaining my entire career trajectory, including the job I quit 3 years ago because of a weird conflict with a coworker named Gerald. Pause. Yeah, Gerald made it into the story. I watched her eyes glaze over in real time. Her body language shifted, feet pointing toward the door. And the worst part was not the conversation itself. The worst part was the next 72 hours, where I replayed that interaction on a loop like some kind of masochistic director's cut. I rewrote my responses. I imagined what I should have said. I constructed entire alternate timelines where I was charming and interesting and did not mention Gerald even once. Here is what I learned later, and I wish someone had told me this years ago. That thing we call overthinking is not actually you being broken or socially incompetent. It has a name in psychology: rumination, and it is your brain's misguided attempt to protect you from future embarrassment by analyzing every possible thing that went wrong. The problem is, your brain is terrible at this job. It does not make you better at conversations. It just makes you exhausted. I want you to hear me on this. Smart people, people who are good at problem solving and analysis, tend to ruminate more. Because in most areas of your life, thinking harder about a problem actually helps you solve it. If your code has a bug, you analyze it until you find the error. If your budget does not balance, you go through the numbers again. But social interactions do not work like code or spreadsheets. They are messy and contextual and full of variables you cannot control. So your analytical brain just spins and spins, trying to find a solution to something that is already over. The silence after an awkward moment feels like physical pressure, does it not? Like the air itself is judging you. And your brain interprets that discomfort as danger. It thinks, if I can just figure out exactly what went wrong, I can prevent this feeling next time. Except that is not what happens. What happens is you start avoiding situations entirely because the mental replay is too exhausting to deal with. Take a second right now and think about the last social interaction you replayed in your head. Short silence. Notice how when you remember it, you are not just recalling facts. You are re-experiencing the emotion. Your heart rate probably changed just thinking about it. That is because rumination does not happen in your logical brain. It happens in your emotional brain, the part that does not care about facts or rationality. It only cares about keeping you safe from perceived threats, and awkwardness registers as a threat. So here is the critical shift I want to introduce. There is a tool from cognitive behavioral therapy called reframing. It is not positive thinking or lying to yourself. Reframing is about learning to change the story your brain tells about what happened. Instead of your internal narrator saying, "That was a disaster, and everyone thinks I'm an idiot," you train it to say something more accurate. "That was awkward, but awkward does not equal catastrophic." Listen closely to this distinction. Your brain loves catastrophic thinking because catastrophic scenarios feel urgent. They demand your attention. But most social moments exist in the gray area between perfect and terrible. They are just neutral, forgettable. The barista who gave you that look probably does not remember you exist. Gerald is living his life completely unbothered. And the woman at the party, the one I bored with my career monologue. She moved on within minutes because she has her own mental spiral to deal with. Cognitive reframing is not about convincing yourself you are amazing at socializing. It is about training your brain to stop treating minor social friction like a 5-alarm fire. And the beautiful thing, the thing that actually made me believe this could work, is that reframing is a skill. It is not a personality trait you either have or do not have. You can practice it. You can get better at it. And when you do, the volume of that anxious internal commentary finally starts to turn down. Here is what we are going to do next. We are not going to stay in the abstract theory space where everything sounds nice, but nothing actually changes. In the next part, I am going to give you specific scripts, word-for-word internal dialogue you can use before, during, and after social situations to intercept the overthinking spiral before it eats your entire evening. These are not affirmations. They are practical mental switches that work because they are based on how your brain actually processes threat and safety. But before we get there, I need you to accept one uncomfortable truth. You cannot stop your brain from generating anxious thoughts. That is not how brains work. Trying to force yourself to stop thinking about something is like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The harder you try, the more it dominates your mental space. What you can do is change your relationship with those thoughts. You can learn to notice them, label them, and let them pass without letting them hijack your entire nervous system. We have all been there, stuck in the mental replay, convinced that one awkward moment defines us. But here's the thing. Overthinking is not your personality. It is a habit. And habits can be unlearned. All right, let us get into the actual mechanics of this. Because knowing that overthinking is a habit is one thing, but changing that habit requires specific tools you can use when your brain starts doing its catastrophic spiral thing. I'm going to give you 3 scripts, 3 mental switches you can flip at different stages of a social situation. Each one has a name, and each one works because it interrupts the pattern your anxious brain loves to follow. The first script is what I call the pre-game reframe. This is for before you walk into a social situation, when your brain is already writing disaster scenarios. You know that feeling, right? You are about to go to a party or a work event, and your internal narrator is already saying things like, what if I run out of things to say? What if everyone ignores me? What if I say something stupid and it ruins everything? That voice is loud, and it feels true, because anxiety always feels true in the moment. Here's the script I want you to memorize. When that anxious voice starts up, you are going to say this to yourself, out loud if possible. My job is not to be perfect. My job is to be present. Let me say that again because it matters. My job is not to be perfect. My job is to be present. This is not a feel-good affirmation. This is a redirect. Your brain thinks success in social situations means saying all the right things and being fascinating, and never having an awkward pause. But that is not what actually creates connection. Presence does. Listening does. Showing up with curiosity instead of a performance anxiety does. I used this script before going to a networking event last month, an event I almost did not attend because my brain was convinced I would embarrass myself. I stood in my car in the parking lot and said it 3 times. My job is not to be perfect. My job is to be present. And something shifted. Not dramatically. I still felt nervous walking in, but the goal changed. Instead of trying to impress everyone, I just tried to have one real conversation. And you know what happened? I had 2, and they were not perfect. There were pauses. There were moments where I did not know what to say next. But I stayed present instead of retreating into my head, and that made all the difference. Now let us talk about the second script, the one for when you are in the middle of a conversation and your brain starts freaking out in real time. I call this the neutral intent reset. Here's the scenario. You are talking to someone and they give you a look, or they check their phone, or they do not laugh at something you thought was funny. Your brain immediately interprets this as rejection or judgment. They think I am boring. They want this conversation to end. I screwed up somehow. The neutral intent reset works like this. When you notice that anxious interpretation starting, you pause internally and say, I'm going to assume neutral intent. They are distracted, not disappointed. This might have nothing to do with me. Listen to how different that feels. Instead of your brain making you the villain in someone else's internal movie, you acknowledge that other people have their own complicated lives and mental noise. Maybe they are checking their phone because they are worried about their kid. Maybe they did not laugh because they are exhausted. Maybe that look was not about you at all. I know this sounds too simple to work, but I need you to understand something about how your anxious brain operates. It is not looking for truth. It is looking for confirmation of its existing belief, which is usually, I am doing something wrong, and people can tell. So it will take any ambiguous signal, a neutral facial expression, a moment of silence, and interpret it as evidence that you are failing. The neutral intent reset interrupts that pattern by forcing your brain to consider an alternate explanation, one that is usually more accurate. Here is what this looks like in practice. I was having coffee with someone I wanted to collaborate with, and halfway through our conversation, she kept glancing at the door. My immediate thought was, she wants to leave. This is going badly. I am wasting her time. But I caught myself. I used the script. I am going to assume neutral intent. She is distracted, not disappointed. This might have nothing to do with me. And then, because I stayed calm instead of spiraling, I just asked her directly, are you expecting someone? Turns out she was meeting her sister after our coffee and was just watching the time. It had nothing to do with me or our conversation. But if I'd let my anxious brain take over, I would have spent the rest of that meeting convinced I had failed. The third script is for after the interaction is over, when you are alone and your brain wants to replay everything on a loop. This is the hardest one because this is when rumination really digs in. I call this the post-game redirect, and it works by giving your brain a different job than analyzing what went wrong. Here's the script. What is one thing I did well? Just one. Not three, not a list. One single thing. Your overthinking brain loves to create highlight reels of every mistake, every awkward pause, every moment you wish you could redo. It will play those moments over and over until you are convinced the entire interaction was a disaster. The post-game redirect interrupts that by forcing your brain to search for evidence of competence instead of incompetence. And here is the sneaky part. Once you find one thing you did well, your brain starts noticing other things. The catastrophic narrative begins to crack. After that networking event I mentioned earlier, I was driving home and my brain immediately started doing its thing. Why did you talk so much about your old project? That joke landed weird. You should have asked more questions. Classic rumination spiral. So I used the script. What is one thing I did well? And I realized. I asked that guy about his startup, and he lit up talking about it. That was good. I did that well. And suddenly, the entire night did not feel like a failure anymore. It just felt like a normal human interaction with some good parts and some awkward parts, which is what all interactions actually are. Let me pause here and give you the critical takeaway. These scripts work not because they are magic words, but because they give your brain something specific to do instead of spiraling. Your anxious brain is like a dog that needs a job. If you do not give it a job, it will create one, and that job will usually be tearing apart your self-esteem. But if you redirect it with these scripts, with these specific mental tasks, it can actually help you instead of hurting you. The last thing I want you to hear is this. You are not going to remember these scripts perfectly the first time you try them. You are going to mess up. You are going to forget to use them until after you are already spiraling. That is fine. That is normal. The goal is not perfection. The goal is practice. Every time you catch yourself overthinking and use one of these redirects, you are rewiring the habit. Slowly, incrementally, but it compounds. And eventually, the volume of that anxious narrator in your head gets quieter. not because you forced it to shut up, but because you trained it to do something more useful.